Now, it's only fair that I give you a warning. This podcast covers true crimes that include serial killers, mass murderers, rapists, child molesters, cults, war criminals, and more. It is not for the faint of heart, and listener discretion is advised. You have been warned. I'm DM Green, and you're listening to In the Dark Mind. Today's case discusses child sexual abuse and institutional failure in a non-graphic, factual manner. It avoids explicit detail and centers on accountability and safeguarding. From the outside, everything about Rolf Harris looked orderly. A familiar face in London living rooms and a steady role inside the BBC's family schedule, as well as a decades-long reputation built to reassure rather than to provoke. By the early 1960s, he was already an Australian-born performer operating largely inside the UK entertainment industry, the kind of cross-Atlantic success story that institutions like to hold up as proof that talent and decency could travel well. And on the 27th of May 2012, when the British Academy Television Awards in London granted him its fellowship, the room didn't just applaud a career, it ratified a public identity. Safe, accomplished, and untouchable. That's the part that audiences remember first. The on-camera steadiness, the easy grin, the sense that this was a man designed for intergenerational viewing. In cases like this, the harm, when it comes to light, rarely begins with a dramatic rupture. It begins earlier, with doors that open without friction, with producers who trust a familiar name, with colleagues who assume someone else has done the checking, with a public that computes longevity with character. The architecture of access is built in plain sight, and it tends to be reinforced by the very institutions that prize stability and family appeal. Harris's story matters not because celebrity is inherently suspect, but because celebrity can be operational. It can function as a credential that never expires. It can turn proximity into something that feels normal and inevitable. When a person becomes a brand, especially a brand marketed as wholesome, gatekeepers often stop behaving like gatekeepers. The questions that would be routine for an unknown person become unthinkable for a familiar one. The instincts that should protect children and young people get softened by the assumption that a kindly public figure must be kind in private too. And then there's the institutional reflex. Protect the schedule, protect the legacy, protect the organisation from embarrassment. That reflex doesn't always require a conspiracy. Sometimes it's just a chain of small decisions made by people who are busy, cautious, and eager not to be the one who creates a problem. A complaint becomes awkward, then inconvenient, then someone else's responsibility. The absence of visible consequence gets mistaken for proof that nothing happened. Silence begins to look like clearance. This is an accountability story, not a celebrity story. It's about how a public persona can become a shield, how credibility, once established, can be converted into access and then defended by routine. It's about the systems that elevate a person and keep them elevated, even when the risks should be obvious. It's about what happens when an institution's self-image becomes more important than uncomfortable scrutiny, and how that trade-off can leave victims carrying the weight alone. There is a temptation, in telling a case like this, to rush straight to the collapse, because that's where the headlines live. But a collapse is only comprehensible if you understand the climb, how a performer becomes trusted, how that trust is renewed year after year, and how it gets monetized into proximity. The end point is not a mystery. The machinery that delivered it is. So we begin where the reassurance began, not with scandal, not with courtroom language, but with the slow construction of the man the public felt it already knew. The hinge moment is not an accusation or a verdict here, at least not yet. It's that May night in 2012, the fellowship in London, the institutional embrace that signalled to millions of viewers that the story of Rolf Harris was finished and safe, when in fact the most consequential chapters were still to come. Rolf Harris was born on the 30th of March 1930 in Basildon, near Perth in Western Australia, to Agnes Margaret Harris and Cromwell Harris, Welsh immigrants from Cardiff who had carried their own histories across oceans and into a new suburb with its own strict rhythms. In a place like that, People learn quickly how to present themselves as decent, diligent and grateful for the opportunities. He attended Bassendean Primary School and later the Perth Modern School in Subiaco in the 1940s, moving through institutions that rewarded performance and composure. Schooling wasn't only about lessons, it was about learning how to be seen. For some, that meant sport. For others, it meant art. For Harris, it would become both. Two separate ways of earning approval and two separate routes into rooms where adults nodded and said, "He's got something." In 1946, still a teenager, he won the Australian Junior 110-yard backstroke swimming championship. It's an early marker, the kind that gets remembered because it suggests discipline and drive, qualities that adults find reassuring in a young person. It also establishes a pattern, achievement that can be easily celebrated, easy to repeat in introductions, easy to file away as evidence of good character. The next year, 1947, his self-portrait was accepted for display as an entry in the Archibald Prize at the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney. For a teenager, that sort of validation can feel like a door swinging open. It also teaches another lesson, that attention can be earned by projecting a version of yourself the public wants to look at, controlled, composed and framed. In 1952, at age 22, he left Australia for England to pursue art studies in London. He wasn't just crossing geography, he was crossing into the larger machinery of cultural status, where gatekeepers had longer memories and bigger platforms. In 1952 and 1953, he enrolled at the City and Guilds of London Art School in South London, stepping into a formal world where technique mattered and contacts mattered too, where being introduced to the right person could count as much as what you could do with a brush. By 1953, he began working on BBC television with an on-air cartoon drawing segment for children's television programming, an early and significant alignment of talent with a young audience and a powerful institution. On the 1st of March 1958, he married Alwyn Hughes, a Welsh sculptor and jeweller in London. And in 1964, the couple had a daughter in the UK, a domestic detail that would sit comfortably alongside the public image of steadiness and normal family life. None of these details on their own predict what later allegations would claim, but together they show how credibility forms early. Achievement, institutional affiliation, and a personal narrative that reads as respectable. The people who became trusted rarely arrive that way overnight. Trust is assembled by schools that reward them, by organisations that platform them, and by audiences that invite them into their homes, and by colleagues who prefer the comfort of a known quantity over the risk of questioning. The crucial point is this: once a person's reputation becomes part of an institution's routine, the institution starts to defend that reputation as if it were defending itself. That is how access becomes durable, and how warnings, if they appear, can be absorbed, delayed, or dismissed. Television doesn't just create fame, it creates familiarity, and familiarity is a kind of currency. In 1959, as television expanded locally in Australia, Harris was recruited back to Perth and worked on TVW7's early locally produced programming, including Spotlight. It's easy to treat that as a career footnote, but it's instructive. He learned early how broadcasting works from the inside, how quickly a face can become one of ours, how a studio can feel like a family, and how a performer who hits all their marks gets invited back. In 1960, the novelty song Tie Me Kangaroo Down Sport became a #1 hit in Australia and helped launch an international music profile. Novelty is often dismissed as lightweight, but that lightness is part of the mechanism. It lowers defences. It tells the audience they don't need to be cautious. It's the kind of success that makes executives see a person as reliable, a safe bet who can travel between formats, music, television, live appearances, without upsetting the audience's sense of comfort. By 1963 in London, he worked with producer George Martin and appeared in Beatles-connected broadcasts as well as live shows during the group's early UK peak. Now this matters less as trivia than as positioning. Proximity to a cultural moment confers legitimacy. It tells the industry, he belongs in the room. It tells the public he's part of the story you already love. That sort of reflected glow can become its own credential, smoothing over doubts and elevating a person beyond ordinary scrutiny. From 1967 to 1974, The Rolf Harris Show ran on BBC One, cementing him as a mainstream television personality. The weekly rhythm of a broadcast does something powerful. It turns a performer into a routine, and routine is what institutions are built on. Once a show is established, it carries staff, budgets, contracts, reputations. People protect it because it feeds livelihoods. A familiar host becomes a stabilizing element. Someone executives would hesitate to disrupt, even when disruption is exactly what safeguarding can require. In 1969, his recording of Two Little Boys reached #1 in the UK charts, reinforcing his status as cross-platform entertainment. This is where the access system starts to look like a network rather than a single job. Music success feeds television credibility. Television credibility feeds live bookings. Each platform advertises the others. The public sees a harmless entertainer. The industry sees a bankable asset. And the more bankable a person becomes, the more inconvenient it is for anyone to imagine that something darker could coexist with the brand. Over decades of TV work, Harris developed a strong family and children's entertainment brand in the UK, later described by the prosecution as part of how he gained access and trust. That description is important because it points to a specific dynamic. The family label isn't just marketing, it's an assurance that shapes how adults behave around a performer. It can encourage parents to relax. It can encourage colleagues to dismiss concerns as misunderstandings. It could persuade institutions to treat safeguarding as a formality rather than an active responsibility. From the 29th of August 1994 to the 13th of September 2004, he presented the BBC One factual entertainment series, Animal Hospital. That kind of long-running role deepens the sense of stability. It's not a chaotic late-night slot. It's the sort of program that feels educational, warm, and safe. Exactly the kind of cultural real estate that turns a public figure into a household fixture. The longer it runs, the more the audience assumes there must be nothing to worry about. Longevity becomes proof. Then there are the ceremonies, public confirmation by the highest symbols of British life. On the 19th of December 2005, he unveiled a BBC commissioned portrait of Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace, tied to her 80th birthday. Whatever else a person is, that image tells the public, here is someone who has passed every test. It tells gatekeepers that he's vetted by proximity, by tradition, and by the palace glow. In reality, ceremonies do not investigate character, they reward usefulness and public perception. But audiences rarely separate those things. On the 1st of July 2008, he was inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in Melbourne. That's the Australian Recording Industry Association. The honour reaches back across the world and confirms that his origin story still sells. The Australian success who made it big overseas. The effect is cumulative. Each award becomes another layer of insulation, another reason for a hesitant colleague to decide, surely not him. Each layer also increases the cost of intervention, because intervention threatens not only a person, but a whole web of institutional decisions that endorsed him. This is how access systems survive, not through constant force, but through constant reassurance. The industry rewards predictability. The public rewards familiarity. Institutions reward themselves for having chosen a safe ambassador. And when a person sits at the centre of that cycle for long enough, the cycle begins to function like protection, sometimes without anyone naming it as such. On the 28th of March 2013, Harris would be arrested at his home in Berkshire, England. The first time that many people truly understood that something had shifted was not in a courtroom, but in a headline. On the 19th of April 2013, UK media, including Sky News, publicly identified Harris as one of those questioned under Operation Yewtree, a name that had been spoken for decades with an easy domestic familiarity was suddenly framed in the language of a police inquiry. That reframing is a kind of public shock. It forces an audience to re-watch a lifetime of appearances with a different set of questions. But the public naming came after quieter steps that were already underway. In late November 2012, Metropolitan Police investigators questioned an unnamed man in his 80s and searched a Berkshire home as part of Operation Yewtree inquiries, later linked in the media to Harris. This is the part of an investigation that outsiders rarely see in real time, the careful, procedural work that does not yet have a face attached to it. Search warrants, interviews, the slow assembly of allegation categories into something that can be tested, corroborated, and charged. Or not. When the name surfaced, it landed inside a broader cultural movement in the UK, a period when institutions were being challenged over how they had handled historical allegations, particularly where celebrity, broadcasting, and children's entertainment overlapped. That context shaped both scrutiny and fear. It created pressure for action, but it also created defensive postures, organisations weighing reputational risk, lawyers anticipating headlines, and the public dividing into camps, those who wanted immediate condemnation and those who wanted immediate disbelief. On the 29th of August 2013, authorities charged Harris with 13 offences, reported as including 9 indecent assault counts and 4 offences relating to indecent images of a child. The details, at a non-graphic level, signalled the breadth of what was being alleged: multiple offences, historical timeframes, and more than one category of criminal accusation. For the public, it was the moment the case stopped being an inquiry and became an assertion by the state that it had enough to prosecute. On the 23rd of December 2013, prosecutors added further historical sexual assault charges connected to additional complaints and timeframes. This is often how complex historical cases unfold. The initial charging decision is not necessarily the end of the investigative picture. New complainants come forward after publicity. Existing accounts are rechecked. Timelines are compared. Prosecutors decide whether additional allegations meet the threshold for trial, knowing the defence will challenge memory, motive, and delay. In June 2014, at Southwark Crown Court in London, Harris stood trial on allegations spanning decades and involving multiple complainants. For a jury, these cases are demanding. They require attention not just to what is alleged, but to how credibility is assessed when time has passed and when a defendant's public image is itself a powerful undertow. The court becomes a place where the familiar is supposed to be stripped away, where the question is not what did we think we knew about him, but what is proven. On the 30th of June 2014, a jury convicted Harris of 12 counts of indecent assault relating to 4 complainants with offences dating between 1968 and 1986. The conviction date is a hard pivot in the narrative. It forces institutions to respond, forces admirers to reconcile, and forces the broader public to confront the reality that a trusted persona can coexist with criminal conduct. It also becomes a reckoning point for victims, some of whom had lived with the burden for years, watching as the system finally placed consequences on someone long protected by status. The sentencing judge later stated that the convicted offences occurred between 1969 and 1986 and involved victims aged between 8 and 19 years of age at the time. That narrow statement, years and ages, cuts through the fog of celebrity. It reminds the audience of what is at stake in safeguarding failures, not abstract reputation management, but real children and young people, and the ways adult institutions can fail to protect them. And the case did not simply vanish after that verdict. In 2016 and 2017, Harris faced a separate later indictment alleging additional indecent assaults against 7 other complainants, distinct from the 2014 conviction case. This is another reality the public often misses. One courtroom outcome does not necessarily encompass every allegation. Investigations can continue. Prosecutors can separate matters by time period or complainant group. The system can still be trying to answer questions long after the first headline has faded. On the 30th of May 2017, after a jury failed to reach verdicts in later proceedings, prosecutors announced they would not pursue further retrial on the remaining counts. The criminal process, by its nature, is both powerful and yet limited. It can declare guilt on some allegations and leave others unresolved, not because the unresolved were unimportant, but because the system has thresholds, resources, and rules that do not map neatly into the full human reality of what victims report. What comes next is the accountability pathway, the formal sentencing, the appeals posture, and the wider institutional consequences that follow when a public figure's brand collapses under the weight of proven offences. On the 4th of July 2014 at Southwark Crown Court, Mr. Justice Nigel Sweeney sentenced Harris to a total of 5 years and 9 months imprisonment. Sentencing is where the court translates a verdict into a state-imposed consequence, and it is also where the narrative becomes formal, no longer allegations, but convictions the system is prepared to punish. The sentencing remarks recorded that the convictions were for 12 offences of indecent assault against 4 victims, committed in England between 1969 and 1986. In that framing, the court narrowed the story to what had been proven to the criminal standard, an essential discipline in a system designed to avoid speculation, even when the public debate rages on beyond the walls of the courtroom. Within weeks, another branch of the state weighed whether the punishment should be challenged as too low. On the 30th of July 2014, the UK Attorney General, Jeremy Wright, decided not to refer Harris's sentence to the Court of Appeal for review as unduly lenient. That decision mattered because it shows how accountability can be contested from different directions. Some argue the system is too harsh, others argue that it's too soft. The Attorney General's role in that narrow mechanism is not to retry guilt, but to decide whether the sentence falls so far outside the norms that it should be revisited. Meanwhile, Harris's side moved in the opposite direction, aiming to disrupt the convictions themselves. By the 1st of August 2014, court paperwork for an appeal attempt had been lodged, but later reporting stated that permission to appeal was refused in October 2014, and the matter was not renewed within the 28-day window. That detail of permissions refused and deadlines closing illustrates how appellate routes can narrow quickly. Appeals are not rehearsings, they are constrained pathways that require arguable legal error, and the system is designed to end cases as well as to start them. The criminal justice process also had to absorb the later proceedings that ran alongside the shadow of the 2014 convictions. In February 2017 at the Southwark Crown Court, Harris was acquitted on 4 counts in the later indictment, and the jury was discharged on remaining counts after failing to agree. For the public, mixed outcomes can be confusing and polarizing, but they are not unusual in complex historical prosecutions involving multiple complainants. The state may meet the burden on some charges and not on others, and juries can split in ways that leave certain counts undecided. In May 2017 at Southwark Crown Court, a further trial ended with jury disagreement. After that, the prosecution did not seek another retrial, and not guilty verdicts were entered on the outstanding counts. That is one of the system's hardest realities for victims and for communities. The legal process can end not with a single definitive yes or no on every allegation, but with a decision that the case will not be run again. Prosecutors weigh the public interest, the prospect of conviction, and the toll on complainants. Sometimes, even after significant effort, the system draws a line and stops. By that point, Harris had already served substantial time. On the 19th of May 2017, he was reported released from prison after serving nearly 3 years of the 2014 sentence. Release dates can become lightning rods, read by some as routine procedure, by others as a signal that the punishment never matches the harm. But in the system's own terms, release is the execution of the sentence rules that apply regardless of the defendant's fame. The appellate story did not end there. On the 16th of November 2017, the Court of Appeal in London quashed Harris's conviction on count 1 as unsafe, but refused leave to appeal on counts 2 to 12. The result is precise and, in its precision, unsettling. One conviction removed and the rest still standing. It shows the appellate court doing what it is designed to do. intervene where it finds an unsafe conviction, while refusing to reopen what it considers properly decided. The same Court of Appeal judgment noted that the Crown did not seek a retrial on the quash count, and that the court agreed that no retrial order should be made. It would also record that the 2014 sentence of 5 years and 9 months had been served by the time of the 2017 appeal decision, meaning that whatever legal adjustments were made on paper, the core custodial consequence had already been completed in practice. In the end, the system delivered imprisonment on the 2014 convictions, upheld most of those convictions on appeal, and closed out later allegations without convictions after jury disagreement and prosecutorial decisions not to pursue further retrials, resolving some criminal responsibility while leaving other accusations formally unanswered. Consequences didn't stay confined to the courtroom. Institutions that once celebrated Harris moved quickly to sever ties, not only to protect their reputations, but because public honours carry moral weight. On the 30th of June 2014, BAFTA announced it had decided to annul the BAFTA fellowship it had bestowed on him in 2012 following his conviction. The reversal mattered precisely because the original honour had been a stamp of trust, an establishment signal that now read in hindsight like a failure of judgment. The recalibration spread. On the 1st of July 2014, reporting indicated that Ira moved to withdraw his Hall of Fame honour after the conviction. On the 2nd of July 2014, the University of East London withdrew an honorary doctorate awarded to him in 2007. These aren't criminal penalties, but they are a different kind of accountability. The dismantling of prestige, the public relabeling of a legacy, and the admission, implicit if not always spoken, that institutions had attached themselves to someone they no longer wanted to claim. Other bodies followed the same pattern. On the 30th of July 2014, the National Trust of Australia, NSW Board, voted to remove Harris from its Australian National Living Treasures list and withdrew the award. In July 2014 in Queensland, Bundaberg Regional Council voted to remove and store a Harris painting from a theatre foyer after the conviction. The argument around public art is often framed as a culture war noise. Separate the art from the artist versus take it down. But there's a more practical reality underneath. Public display is endorsement. Councils and trusts aren't neutral walls. They are civic gatekeepers choosing what a community is asked to honour. The formal revocations extended international honours. On the 22nd of February 2015, Australia's Governor-General terminated Harris's appointments as member and officer of the Order of Australia, following his UK convictions. On the 3rd of March 2015, an official notice reported in the UK press said his CBE appointment, dated the 17th of June 2006, was cancelled and annulled. These steps show how states handle a reputational breach after criminal findings. Honours are not just medals, they are signals about what a nation chooses to elevate, and yet the reassessment did not end in 2014 or in 2015. Institutions continued debating what to do with Harris-linked public art for years, including Australian local councils still discussing whether to retain or dispose of works connected to him as late as November 2022. That persistence is the real legacy of a case like this. Once the public learns that a trusted figure could be convicted, everything associated with that trust becomes contested. Plaques, portraits, awards, archived episodes, each becomes a small referendum on whether institutions learned anything at all. Harris died on the 10th of May 2023 at his home in Bray, Berkshire, with death attributed to neck cancer and frailty of old age. His death was publicly confirmed to the press on the 23rd of May 2023, almost 2 weeks after the date of death. Even that delay feels characteristic of how these stories often end, quietly, administratively, and without the catharsis some people expect, because the emotional reckoning for victims and for the public is rarely synchronized with the subject's final day. What remains is a safeguarding lesson that is neither sensational nor abstract. Predators do not require darkness, they require routine. Institutions that confuse reputation with safety, and gatekeepers who treat familiarity as evidence. The public-facing takeaway is simple and hard. The question is not whether a person can be charming on camera. The question is whether the systems around them are built to notice risk, to take concerns seriously and to act fast, transparently, and without waiting for a headline to force their hand. If you've enjoyed this episode, please remember, give me a like, a share, and subscribe. I'm DM Green, and until the next time, this is In the Dark Mind.